are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, your host for Locked On Seahawks. Joining me as always, my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. After a much-deserved bye week, the Seahawks will be back in action on Sunday, playing against the Packers at Lambeau Field, and they'll have a certain number 3 back under center, most likely. Pete Carroll yesterday was non-committal about naming him the starter, but the writing's on the wall as long as he's able to get through practice this week. Russell Wilson will be back in action, so great news for the Seahawks heading into the second half of their schedule. We're going to start diving in on Seattle's upcoming opponent, the Packers, coming off of a tough loss to the Kansas City Chiefs without Aaron Rodgers, but still 7-2. We'll be looking at what's new at the Packers and revisiting the last time the Seahawks won at Lambeau Field 21 years ago for Throwback Tuesday. Glad to have you listening as always, and thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Now for your lead story here on Locked On Seahawks. There's been a lot of speculation over the past several days on whether or not the Seahawks were going to put in a claim on former Browns receiver Odell Beckham Jr. once he hit the waiver wire. Turns out none of the 31 teams that were able to do so decided to put in a claim. And the big reason why Beckham had $7.25 million remaining on his contract for the rest of this season. And apparently no teams were willing to pay that price. Even a team like the Seahawks that had over $13 million in cap space could afford that contract, opted to pass. But, Rob, it sounds like the Seahawks are still very interested in trying to make this work. It shouldn't come as a surprise that John Schneider's trying to go the cheaper route here. A lot of that cap space they have might be used next year rolling over to try to cover some of those voided years on a number of contracts for players. There's other reasons why they may have decided against claiming Odell Beckham Jr., aside from just the fact that that's a pretty pricey expense for a player that you're going to have for 9 games, then he's going to hit the free agent market. Sounds like the Seahawks are still very interested, but there's a risk here. You could have claimed him for that more expensive price and been guaranteed that you were going to have him on your roster. Now that's not the case with a number of other teams reportedly interested in him and a new favorite emerging to sign him.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that I think the Seahawks would be wise to kind of kick the tires on Odell Beckham. I just don't know that he is the slam dunk automatic addition that some have portrayed him as. And, obviously all 32 NFL teams felt exactly the same way. The Cleveland Browns, of course, who released him, the New York Giants, who had previously allowed him to leave their franchise after selecting him in the first round out of LSU years ago. And then obviously the other 30 NFL teams out there. So I think of the 6 teams that we're going to be highlighting here soon as the logical favorites for the Seahawks, or the favorites for Odell Beckham to land, then I think that it's interesting that Seattle is the team that has the worst record among them, but arguably they have the best quarterback among them. And that's one of the reasons why that you and I and many others have argued that Odell Beckham makes a lot of sense to wind up landing in Seattle, just because this is a talented football player. You are talking about a head coach in Pete Carroll who has been willing to roll the dice on players who, let's be real, have had some kind of off-field issues or some personality issues that maybe would scare off some other coaching staffs, but certainly not Pete Carroll, who has had a great deal of success with guys who have been branded as, kind of guys who would struggle under most franchises. But Pete Carroll has had a great deal of success with those types of players. The fact that you have Russell Wilson coming back and has had or shown some rapport with Odell Beckham Jr. in the past, to me, that is one of the strong things here. And then the fact that Seattle basically gambled hard with their second round selection of D. Eskers Jr. and the fact that he was unable at this point to be able to make any type of significant contribution to the Seahawks this season, then Seattle does have a need for a third pass catcher. So I think all of those are reasons why Seattle would make an awful lot of sense to sign Odell Beckham. But at the same time, I just don't view him as the end all be all answer that a lot of people otherwise have argued that he might be. And that's why I think that it would make some sense for us to kind of look at some of the other clubs out there that I think that Odell Beckham and his representatives are looking at, including the Green Bay Packers, who some have argued might be the favorite for Odell Beckham Jr. to land at this point.
Yeah, Jordan Schultz today, earlier, just about 2 hours before the waiver wire period ended, said that if Beckham cleared waivers, that the Packers were his first choice. Now, there have been other reports out there suggesting that the Seahawks would be his first choice. So depends which sources you are following here as far as who's the favorite. But the Packers do make a ton of sense. Unlike the Seahawks, they don't have two superstar receivers. They've got Devante Adams. Allen Lazard's a fine player. They got a couple other receivers that are decent, but they don't have that second bona fide star on the outside, which Odell Beckham absolutely would be for them. They've got Aaron Rodgers, who's expected to be back this week from the COVID list, so he's going to be back in action, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, the defending MVP. So that would check off the boxes that the sources I've talked to indicated were biggest priorities for Beckham. He wanted to play with a proven veteran quarterback. Aaron Rodgers checks that off. For a contender, the Packers obviously check that off. They've got playoff pedigree and experienced team that's been to the NFC Championship the last couple of years, and he would still be a prime target as the number 2 receiver behind Devante Adams. He'd be the number 3 guy in Seattle, but you can make an argument that Beckham benefits from having Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf alongside him. Teams aren't going to be able to bracket cover. They're going to have favorable matchups going against him because you got to pick your poison. And based on the way Beckham's performed the last couple seasons, he's going to be third fiddle behind Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. That is a very dangerous number 3 receiver. And he does have that prior relationship with Russell Wilson. So this is what I said on Twitter earlier today. I still feel this way. I would be stunned if Odell Beckham Jr. is not at Lambeau Field on Sunday. Do I know what uniform he's going to be wearing? I have absolutely no clue. But it's going to be one of those two teams based on what I've been told and what his preferences are. Even though the Seahawks are 3-5, they're only half a game out of a wild card spot right now. They still are very much in the playoff hunt. They're getting their star quarterback back from injury this week. They've got all these other weapons that they can put around him. So that would be very appealing to him. So again, I think those are the two teams that would be the front runners right now. The Saints have been rumored for the last couple of days because they need a number 1 receiver. They're 5-3. They're very much in the playoff hunt right now, the number 6 seed in the NFC. But they just lost Jameis Winston for the year to a torn ACL. Trevor Siemian is the quarterback. If I'm Odell Beckham Jr., that is not my first or second destination I'm looking at, even if it is the state I played college ball in, and the Saints have a very good defense. Who's throwing me the football? Trevor Siemian versus Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson. That just wouldn't seem to me like that would match with the preferences he's looking for. And I think you can make the same argument for the Patriots. That would be a good fit, that really they need a number 1 receiver right now. But Mac Jones is a rookie that's done some nice things. He's still a rookie, not a high-powered offense by any means, but the Patriots have been rumored as a destination. The 49ers are floated. I don't see the 49ers being a team that's going to have a ton of interest, and they've got quarterback issues. And then you've got the Buccaneers and the Rams, who clearly have great quarterbacks. They've been to the postseason. The Bucs just won it all last year. They're loaded at receiver, but Antonio Brown's been banged up. And if he's willing to take less to go to a championship contender, then obviously the Buccaneers would check off those main 2 boxes. The Rams would as well. With him not being on waivers anymore and being much more affordable, those teams now can enter the fray if they are interested. But again, I think this boils down to the 2 teams that are going to be at Lambeau Field on Sunday. I could see one of these other teams surprising and just making him an offer he can't refuse. But I think the Seahawks and the Packers, they have the quarterback situations that would be most enticing to Odell Beckham Jr.
I think that they have the quarterback situations. I think they have the head coaches. I think that in case of Seattle, they have the salary cap flexibility. I would agree with you to some extent that I'd be surprised if Odell Beckham Jr. signs with a club other than the Green Bay Packers or the Seattle Seahawks. Stunned might be a little bit strong, but I do think this is going to be fascinating because to me, the team that makes the most sense would be the Saints. And you just mentioned some of the reasons why. The fact that they do not have a number one wide receiver at this point, with all due respect to Marquez Callaway, Michael Thomas perhaps coming back, and the fact that he did play his college ball in the beautiful state of Louisiana. The New Orleans Saints are a really good football team, but at the same time, Trevor Siemian, I don't know that he, that he exhibits the same type of talent and is going to create the same type of excitement on Odell Beckham Jr. and his representatives. I'm not sure that he's going to get that kind of excitement from them. So I don't know that is going to be where that they sign. The same thing with New England Patriots. I mean, the New England Patriots are playing good football right now. Mac Jones is a good quarterback. Is Bill Belichick the type of player-friendly coach that Odell Beckham Jr. wants to sign with? I have a hard time believing that. And then again against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, when there are the Seahawks fans out there, and I'm sure there are fans in Green Bay as well, who are going to argue that why would you want to bring a guy like Odell Beckham Jr., this player that some are characterizing as a locker room cancer? Why would you want to bring him into your team? Well, we had this exact same conversation a year ago, Corbin, about Antonio Brown, and obviously Antonio Brown is walking.
I hate to interrupt you, Rob, but those two are nothing alike. One guy has been a bit of a diva in the locker room. The other one has had criminal charges against him. And
he's the one who's got a Super Bowl ring now. And that would be my point, is that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers pushed in and gambled, and now they won a championship. And I'm not saying it's because of Antonio Brown. It's clearly because of Tom Brady and that defense. But the point I would make is that teams that are willing to roll the dice have won at times, including the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And so that would be one of the arguments that why a team like the Seattle Seahawks might consider taking Odell Beckham. Just because the fact that if you want to portray him as a locker room cancer, that was the way that Antonio Brown was portrayed a year ago. And yet the Tampa Bay Buccaneers took that risk, and then won a Lombardi trophy. And so that would be the argument that some would have, is why Seattle should be all in on Odell Beckham Jr., because he can potentially be that difference maker the way that Antonio Brown was at times for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers before.
We'll see what ends up happening here. Josina Anderson of USA Today said that Beckham's going to be taking his time with this decision, so we might not have a new team for Odell Beckham until a day or two from now. I would think he would want to get that decision done fairly quickly, though, if he wants to play as soon as possible. And so patient, but at the same time, you don't have a lot of time to sit back and try to look through your offers. So I would expect in the next day, two at the most, that we'll know where Odell Beckham Jr. is heading. Could it be the Seahawks? Could it be the Packers? Could it be another team? We'll just have to wait and see. When we return for the second quarter, it's Throwback Tuesday. We're going to go back in time to 1999, the last time the Seahawks beat the Packers at Lambeau Field. Mike Holmgren's first season on the sidelines. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you haven't tried a Built Bar by now, you are missing out. I promise you, it's not just a protein bar. It tastes like a candy bar. You have to try one of these amazing bars yourself to believe it. Most protein bars are chalky or waxy, but a Built Bar is soft, covered in 100% real chocolate, and when you bite into it, you know you're eating something different. It's truly an experience. Built Bars are low carb, low calorie, low fat, low sugar, and high in protein. So it has all the healthy benefits on top of just being purely delicious. And there are so many great flavors: coconut almond, salted caramel, my personal favorite, peanut butter brownie, double chocolate. So many delicious flavors to choose from. And this month, Built is coming out with a new limited time flavor every 3 to 4 days. So check their website often. You don't want to miss out. Go to Built.com and use the promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. That's LOCK15 for 50% off at Built.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Throwback Tuesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Joining me as always, Rob Rang. The Seahawks getting ready to head to Lambeau Field for the first time in 2 years. Last time they met the Packers in Green Bay, they lost in the divisional round. That was shortly before the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we were living in a different world at that time period. But the Seahawks, unfortunately, were not able to complete the comeback in that game. And they still have not won in Lambeau since way back in 1999. So with them heading back to Green Bay this weekend, Rob, let's go back to that game because there were so many emotions. And I think it's fitting that we're going to be talking about this game, considering Mike Holmgren a few weeks ago was inducted into Seattle's Ring of Honor. This was really the first marquee victory that he had on the sidelines for the Seahawks. And again, so many emotions. He went to 2 Super Bowls, won one of them as head coach of the Packers. The fan base embraced him. There weren't boos. They were cheering him. They were happy to see him back at Lambeau Field. But obviously, there's a lot of emotion there when you're going against the team that you led to the Super Bowl twice, did so many great things with the relationship he had with Brett Favre, their quarterback as well, a number of those players that were still on the roster. So emotions were running high, and yet the Seahawks rode those emotions to a 27-7 win. This really was a dominant effort, and the Packers were able to tie the game early. Sean Springs, what a game that he had for the Seahawks. Young corner, former first-round pick, had a blocked field goal that he returned 61 yards for a touchdown to start the scoring. Seattle's up 7-0. Brett Favre throws a 74-yard touchdown to tie the game. And from there, it was all Seahawks. And it's weird saying this because at times that defense was not great in 1999. Their defensive coordinator, unfortunately, Fritz Shermer, passed away before he coached a game for the Seahawks due to cancer. He passed away in August. And Jim Lind, who wound up coaching tight ends for the next several years for the Seahawks, went over to become the defensive coordinator. They actually finished 8th in points against that year. Pretty impressive with him as the defensive coordinator. Kind of up and down season, but they shut down Brett Favre and company in this game.
Yeah, they certainly did. And I love that you mentioned just how classy the fans at Lambeau were, because I am very curious to see how the fans are going to react should Aaron Rodgers be on the field for the Green Bay Packers this weekend. But, that said, let's go back in time to 1999. Now, Corbin, I'm shocked that you want to have this conversation because I was a relatively young man, just finishing up my final year at Central Washington University. And I mentioned Central Washington University because that is, of course, the college that Seattle's starting quarterback at that time, John Kitna, had also graduated from. And the fact that the Seahawks did win that game 27-7 against the Green Bay Packers with Mike Holmgren coming back to Lambeau, with Matt Hasselbeck still a member of the Green Bay Packers. In fact, had some snaps against the Seahawks because the Seattle was able to pull away in that game and make it the laugher that it was. That Derek Mays, the wide receiver for the Seahawks, previously had played in Green Bay, caught a touchdown against his former team, the Packers, in this contest. The go-ahead touchdown from John Kitna in this game. To me, that's one of the fun memories I have of Mike Holmgren's kind of tenure in Seattle. And a spectacular one at that, very well deserved. I haven't been on the podcast since Mike Holmgren was officially announced as one of the men in the Ring of Honor. So all due respect and very much congratulations to Mike Holmgren being in the Ring of Honor for the Seahawks. I think back in that game, and you mentioned the player that I think that we absolutely have to mention, Sean Springs. Not only had the big play on special teams, he had 2 interceptions in that game as well. I mean, it was absolutely spectacular. The Seattle had 7 different turnovers against Brett Favre and the Green Bay Packers. Willie Williams had an interception. Merton Hanks had an interception. Cortez Kennedy, the late great Hall of Famer Cortez Kennedy, had 3 sacks in that game. Absolutely spectacular performance by Seattle's defense.
Yeah, I remember Kennedy's dominant performance because this was towards the tail end of his playing career. This was one of the last great games that he had with the Seahawks, and it was a very memorable one for him. And Sean Springs might have been the best game of his entire career when you add in the special teams touchdown, the 2 interceptions, 3 pass breakups. He was everywhere. I mean, Brett Favre completed 14 out of 35 passes with 1 touchdown and 4 picks in that game. I mean, he just had no answer for the Seahawks defense. They were pressuring him with their front line. The secondary was playing lights out. And the offense did just enough. I mean, the offense didn't need to be world beaters in this game with the way the defense was playing, but John Kitna was very efficient, 12 for 19, 109 yards through a pair of touchdowns that ended up giving the Seahawks a 21-7 lead after 3 quarters. They were in command really from the outset of this game. And Ricky Watters, 135 rushing yards on 31 carries, being the workhorse that he was throughout his NFL career, a guy that you could turn and hand to, that was reliable, that was durable. You knew that you could give him the ball 25 plus times and he was going to be able to get the job done. And so they ran the ball well. They were efficient with their passing game, 40 degrees, 18-mile-an-hour winds. You weren't going to be able to sling it all over the place. The Packers were forced to try to do that. And Brett Favre, even with his arm strength, was not able to do it against the Seahawks defense. So it was a really exciting year because the Seahawks had not been to the playoffs since 1989. They had not been to the playoffs in the 90s. Mike Holmgren's first season, they go 9-7. They win the AFC West, lose a heartbreaker in the wild card round of the Dolphins, but it was a roaring success as far as first seasons go. And kind of the change from one era to another when you're talking about Cortez Kennedy still being on the roster, still making big plays. They still had Michael Sinclair in the roster. He was towards the tail end of his career at that point. Chad Brown was in his prime. He had 12 tackles and a fumble recovery in this game. So you just consider it was really a bridging from one era that had been defined by poor quarterback play, no playoff appearances, into the Holmgren era, which they had some growing pains the next few years, especially at the quarterback position when they turned to Matt Hasselbeck. But eventually we know how things unfolded. Went to the playoffs 5 straight years, got to their first Super Bowl, the first really successful era of Seahawks football where they consistently were a contender once they flipped over to the NFC. But this was the starting point there for Mike Holmgren. A number of those players weren't on the roster after a year or two, but they were able to get some big wins. And I think this was the biggest one they had in that first year that Mike Holmgren was coach. There's no question for him it was going back to Lambeau and being able to get the win in convincing fashion. And it looks even better now when you consider the Seahawks now haven't won at that building ever since.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that this has been basically a house of horrors for Seattle ever since that point. And so that to me is one of the fascinating things, is because, as you mentioned, this was a bit of a transition. You know, again, it was John Kitna who was the starting quarterback for the Seahawks. Matt Hasselbeck was still a member of the Green Bay Packers, and we all know that Matt Hasselbeck's success rate against the Green Bay Packers in future years was not what Seattle had hoped it to be, especially in Lambeau. But still, this was the first game that really solidified, I think, in the minds of a lot of, Seattle fans who were a little bit skeptical about whether or not Mike Holmgren was going to be able to come to Seattle and turn the Seahawks into a winner, to be able to go on national television and be able to have this victory against the Green Bay Packers there, and the future Hall of Famer Brett Favre with a former undrafted free agent in John Kitna, and to be able to clearly outplay the Green Bay Packers the way that they did. I think a lot of skeptical Seahawks fans became real Seahawks fans that night.
Yeah, it really was a turning point. And even though the end of that season didn't maybe play out the way that Holmgren hoped it would, they started 5-2. This game made them 5-2. They only won 4 of their last 9 games, but still won the division, lost the wild card round. It was still a very successful first season when you just consider how bad the Seahawks had been for the last decade, consistently at the bottom of the AFC West, a number of really bad seasons, or they were hovering around 500. That was when they were at their best during that decade. For them to finally get over the hump and get back to the playoffs was a big deal, and it was a sign of things to come. They had to wait a few more seasons to get back to the playoffs, but you could see Mike Holmgren's imprint on this franchise with the way they played, and this really was the first signature win that he had with the Seahawks, beating his former team. When we return for the third quarter, we're going to fast forward back to the present and take a look at the 2021 Green Bay Packers. What's new as far as additions, departures, draft picks, injury report, and of course, inside the numbers, breaking down Seattle's upcoming Week 10 opponent. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey, Seahawks fans, this is Corbin Smith with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about. Get Upside. My listeners are making up to 25 cents for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use the promo code TOUCHDOWN to get 25 cents per gallon as a bonus on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app and use the promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or on an e-gift card from Amazon and other brands. Download the free Get Upside app today and use the promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Tuesday edition. This is your host, Corbin Smith, joined as always by Rob Rang. After enjoying a week off, the Seahawks will be back in action and hitting the road to travel to Lambeau Field to play Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. Rodgers is expected to be back in action on Sunday. Not 100% sure he's going to be able to play, but Saturday will be the first day that he's allowed to come off the COVID-19 reserve list. And based on reports and what he said today, sounds like the 2020 MVP will be back for the Packers. Even if he only has 1 day of practice work, he's going to be doing all the mental preparation during the week that he's able to do, and he's expected to start. The Packers are 7-2. They're at first place in the NFC North, and they're doing things a little bit differently in Green Bay now than what they have done for most of Aaron Rodgers' career, where they were mostly relying on their offense and being a high-powered scoring football team. Rob, this is a very good defensive team that has done well against a number. Even last week, the Kansas City Chiefs, they've had their struggles this year, but they held the Chiefs to just 14 points, and they gave Jordan Love a chance to win. His first NFL start came up just short. This is a very good defense front to back, and they made a few additions in free agency that have really helped that group. In particular, linebacker Devante Campbell, who leads the team in interceptions, he's having one of the best seasons of his career in Green Bay's defense.
He really is. Devante Campbell's a really good football player. He played his collegiate ball at the University of Minnesota. Went to the Atlanta Falcons. It was a big part of Dan Quinn's defense there that wound up going to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. Just a really rangy, athletic, instinctive linebacker who continues to get better and better. When he had his first kind of breakout season with the Atlanta Falcons, I was comparing him to KJ Wright in terms of his ability to play in space. And now the Green Bay Packers are asking him to rush the quarterback a little bit more. They're asking him to come up and play a little bit more run support, really proving himself to be the kind of all-around heat-seeking missile at the linebacker position that, let's face it, the Green Bay Packers have been missing for a long time. And then they also have had significant contributions from some of their other pass rushers. Preston Smith was brought in a couple of years ago. He had an immediate impact, continues to be one of Green Bay's better pass rushers. The rookie Eric Stokes has made some spectacular plays opposite Jair Alexander at the cornerback position for Green Bay this season. So you're absolutely right, Corbin. While this has been a team that has been primarily known for offense, especially in the passing game, it has been defense. It has been the running game. Aaron Jones continues to prove that he is one of the more underrated running backs in all of the NFL, even with Jordan Love basically playing terribly in his NFL starting debut a week ago. The Green Bay Packers are very much in the game against the Kansas City Chiefs, team that's gone to back-to-back Super Bowls, of course, over the last couple of years. They were in that game because of the strength of their running game and their defense. So this is going to be a formidable matchup regardless of who Seattle is facing at the quarterback position for the Packers this week.
Campbell and Stokes have been the two biggest additions to that defense, one coming through free agency, the other one being their first-round selection out of Georgia. They did also add Whitney Mercilus recently off of waivers from the Houston Texans, and so he's going to continue to take on a bigger role in this defense, a proven veteran that's done a lot of great things in the NFL in his career with the Texans. So adding more depth and talent to their linebacking and pass rushing group. Rashawn Gary's been really good this year for them as well. So this defense has just been outstanding, and it's what really has led to the hot start for them being atop the NFC North. Offense has been fine, but it just hasn't been as electric as we've seen in previous seasons. They did have some big-name departures. One of them, Corey Linsley, who was an all-pro center last year, ended up going to the Chargers. many Seahawks fans were hoping that the Seahawks would make a run at him in free agency. That did not happen, so they lost him in free agency. They also lost running back Jamal Williams, guard Lane Taylor, and linebacker Christian Kirksey. Not a lot of big names there, but certainly Lindsley was the big loss for them during free agency going to the Chargers, and they've had to try to fill the gap at the center position. And one way they did that was with Josh Myers, who they drafted in the second round out of Ohio State. He's started a handful of games. They have had some shuffling at that position. So you've got Stokes playing a lot of downs in the secondary, and he's their first rounder, second round pick. Josh Myers did some things early on at center. They've had a few other rookies that have played significant snaps as well. So compared to a lot of teams, they've gotten more contributions from their rookie class than a lot of others.
Yeah, Corbin, you're so good. I see what you did there. You said a handful of games by Josh Myers. Of course, Josh Myers has gone down with a hand injury the last couple of weeks. And so, but Josh Myers was absolutely spectacular for Green Bay early on. The offensive lineman Royce Newman, who they selected, about 100 picks later in the fourth round, has also been really, really good for the Green Bay Packers. And it just kind of goes to show, what I think we all realize is that if you have a superstar quarterback, you have a superstar running back, it's a lot easier to be a pretty good offensive lineman as well. And so the fact that the Green Bay Packers have had significant success with two of their, let's call them middle round selections along the offensive line is a testament to the Packers and their scouting staff. And Eric Stokes was a questionable first round pick, at least in my opinion. Eric Stokes had flashed. He certainly had not dominated for Georgia in the past, but he's played pretty good football. Now it's going to remain to be seen if Eric Stokes is going to be able to continue that solid play, because he was one of several significant Green Bay Packers who has gone down to injury. He and one of the Green Bay's best defensive linemen, Kenny Clark, both went down to injury in that loss, as you mentioned, to the Kansas City Chiefs earlier. So if either one of those players are not available for Green Bay against Seattle, then that would be significant. But let's talk about some of the things that the Green Bay is doing very well. I think that we have to focus in on number 17. Everybody focuses in on the quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, and we all know that he's a spectacular talent. Say what you will about if he's a leader and some of his off-field decisions. We all know that he is a dynamic talent, obviously the NFL's reigning MVP, but a huge part of that is the fact that he had the most productive receiver in all of football a year ago in Devante Adams. And some would argue that Devante Adams has not been nearly the player so far this year. And in terms of touchdowns, he has not. But at the same time, he has 786 receiving yards so far this season. That's fourth most in the NFL. If this is a down season for Devante Adams, then sign me up for down seasons every time. Devante Adams is an absolute superstar, as is Aaron Jones, the running back. I still think one of the most underrated players in all of the NFL, regardless of position.
Yeah, he has 25 missed tackles that he has forced so far this year, according to Pro Football Focus. That's the eighth most of the NFL. And he's obviously not a running back that's going to bowl you over. That's not necessarily his style. He can break arm tackles, though. He's more powerful than you would think. His ability to make defenders miss in space, he's one of the best in the game at that. And really his vision, I think that's the best attribute in his game. If you go back to the playoff game a few years ago, he burned the Seahawks a couple of times simply by using his vision to find cutback lanes. And he's very decisive. He's a very intelligent running back and obviously a weapon out of the backfield as well. So he and A.J. Dillon, the thunder and lightning package they've got, that's going to be something the Seahawks are going to have to key in on, because I think those two running backs can cause problems for any defense with the way that their skill sets complement one another. A few other numbers that jump out to me on offense. We talk so much about Aaron Rodgers and his greatness, and obviously he is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the best quarterbacks that has ever played the game. But one thing he has really struggled with this year, when opponents have brought extra pressure, anytime there's 5 or more defenders coming after him, in the past, he's been really good against the blitz. But this season, he's taken a step back. He's averaging 4.4 yards per attempt this year when opponents bring 5 or more rushers. And I'm not saying the Seahawks should be blitzing him 75% of the time. That's not at all what I'm arguing for. But bringing extra pressure has been effective against him this year. Only 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions when he's been blitzed with that low yards per attempt average. So while he's been great in a number of other ways this year, that has been how teams have been able to get to him a little bit. The extra pressure, he has not been near as efficient, and not having as many weapons, including losing his tight end, Robert Tonyan, certainly hurts as well, but has not been effective against the blitz. And when you're looking from an efficiency standpoint for the offense as a whole, they're in the middle of the pack, no pun intended. They're in the middle of the pack right now offensively. Going into last week's game, they were 16th in points. I haven't checked to see where they're at now. They probably dropped significantly after only scoring 7 points in week 9. But this has been an offense that has not been putting a ton of points on the board consistently this year. They won with defense, and a big reason for that, their third down conversion rate is 39.2%, which is ranked 18th in the NFL, and they're 20th in the league in red zone touchdown percentage at 55%. So Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, some of the weapons they've got, the running game they've got, only scoring touchdowns on 55% of their red zone trips. That's one of the reasons this offense has not been near as explosive as we've seen from Green Bay offenses in the past.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is Corbin, you're giving all kinds of numbers to back up the argument that if you just watch the tape, you can see that it's Devante Adams, Aaron Jones, Aaron Rodgers, and that's about it. I mean, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Adam Lazard, Robert Tonyan, as you mentioned, who is injured now. I mean, these are quality complementary players. None of them are true stars. Now, I say that, and Seattle may struggle against any of them because Seattle has struggled to cover a lot of pass catchers, whether it be out of the backfield, a tight end, or receiver so far this season. But at the same time, that would be one of the arguments that I think that Odell Beckham Jr. and his representatives might, put forth there is why OBJ should be signed with Green Bay if he truly wants to win a title. And I have my questions about that as well. I wonder if maybe he's looking for a little bit of bling more than a ring at this point in his respective career. But again, I think that the biggest thing here is that Green Bay does not have the quality options other than their dynamic wide receiver, dynamic running back, really to spread the football around. And so that's one of the reasons why Green Bay has struggled, because they are a little bit one-dimensional when it comes to the passing game and the running game. Now switching over to the defense, because again, I think that is the strength of the Green Bay Packers team. To me, one of the things that immediately jumps out is the fact that Rashawn Gary, a former top 10 selection by Green Bay a couple of years ago out of Michigan, that he has taken that next step. For the Packers. He does lead this team in sacks. The aforementioned Kenny Clark, who may wind up missing the game against Seattle due to a back injury. Those are really the 1-2 punch that has emerged for Green Bay. You don't often see an edge rusher like Rashawn Gary, who at his size, 6'4", 280 pounds, and then Kenny Clark, a solid 310-pounder, that being your 1-2 punch. Preston Smith is still a dynamic edge rusher as well. To me, it's that front seven is absolutely attributing to the fact that Green Bay is basically creating sacks on almost 7% of the dropbacks the quarterbacks are facing. That's 11th in the NFL. And Green Bay has not been as healthy on the defensive side of the ball as some of the other clubs here. So I do think that this is a pass rush that the Seahawks have got to be concerned about. And considering that you are going to ask Russell Wilson to come into this game, his first game back after the finger injury, obviously, that has got to be a huge, huge concern for the Seahawks.
It's interesting because, there's a number of positives. This is a really good defense. You mentioned the pass rush, the sack percentage. Rashawn Gary's had a fantastic year. They have only given up 22 passes of 20 or more yards this year. That's the 7th fewest in the league. So they're not giving up explosives in the passing game. A lot of that has to do with that pass rush being as effective as it's been. Their run defense has been solid, not elite by any means, but it's been solid enough with their pass defense. Where they have had trouble has been getting off the field. They are near the bottom of the league in third down defense right now at 41.5%. That's 20th in the NFL. So something's got to give here because Seattle's been awful converting on third down. With Russell Wilson coming back, can they make improvements there? If they're able to sustain drives, that is going to benefit them playing on the road in this game against the Packers offense that, even though they're middle of the pack this year, they still are capable of putting points on the scoreboard. And where they've really been bad has been in the red zone. They have given up touchdowns, Rob, on 76% of their red zone possessions this year. That is 31st in the NFL. So if Seattle can get inside the 20, they got to like their chances of being able to finish drives. It's funny because last week, that was actually a strength for the Packers against the Chiefs. But the entire rest of this year, that has been the Achilles heel for Green Bay's defense, is getting those stops in the red zone. And they have not been able to do that consistently, hence why they almost 80% of the time have been giving up touchdowns when opponents are inside the 20. The Seahawks have to be able to capitalize when they get in those positions on Sunday.
They absolutely do. And it'll be interesting to see, who's calling the game from a referee standpoint. I mean, if it's going to be Tony Correnti, if he's going to be giving hip checks rather than the discount double checks, that are the Green Bay Packers, then that might be some of the reason why that Seattle might be able to score those touchdowns in the red zone. Because as you mentioned, Corbin, it just seems like Green Bay plays really good defense in between the 20s. But once they get into the red zone, some of their inexperience starts to show up. Eric Stokes has been victimized several different times on pass interference and holding penalties. That might be something that Seattle could take full advantage of.
We're going to be breaking down individual matchups as we do each and every Wednesday coming up on tomorrow's show. We've got the numbers. Now we can really dive in on those individual matchups, the players to watch at Lambeau Field on Sunday. As always, we'll be looking forward to sharing our insight and some thoughts on those key matchups coming up on our next episode. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Bets your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets is hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. You can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to check out Locked On Seahawks on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. That's AUDACY. Coming up on tomorrow's show, it's all about matchups. Matchup Wednesday, Rob and I will be diving into matchups to watch when the Seahawks are on offense versus the Packers on defense, and vice versa. One of our favorite shows of the week. We hope you'll be listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.